After my dad's funeral, when everyone was talking about who would get what from his money and stocks, my brother-in-law, who's married to my sister Kelly, suddenly said that all of it, including $5 million, should go to Kelly, the oldest sibling. My sister and brother-in-law were happy, but the lawyer told them they couldn't just decide that. My name's John Watson. I'm 42, work in sales, and have a wife and 2 kids. My dad owned a big part of a company, and even though he was old, he still worked. My sister Kelly, who's older than me, has always been a bit of a problem for our parents with her bad behavior. Even now, in her middle years, she still doesn't have a steady job and just lives her life however she wants. I've never really liked her, so I've always kept my distance. Then, when she turned 50, out of the blue, she brings home this guy and says, "I'm getting married." The guy, Chris Adams, is younger and good-looking, but he's pretty lazy and not very pleasant. My sister starts asking Dad for money for the wedding, like it's no big deal. She blows through the cash real quick and then has the nerve to ask for more, which really upsets Dad. She figures she'll inherit everything eventually, so why not? I just watch her with a cold stare. Less than a year after she gets married, Dad has a heart attack while playing golf and passes away a few days later. It hits me hard, and I feel really sad. The sudden news of Dad's passing shocked all his friends, and our phones wouldn't stop ringing with condolences. But I couldn't just sit there and cry. I took charge, helping my stunned mom with all the arrangements for the funeral. As usual, my sister was nowhere to be found, off doing her own thing. After the funeral, utterly exhausted, Mom and I finally got a chance to catch our breath. But the very next day, a lawyer showed up at our door to talk about Dad's will. Mom and I already knew what was in it, but my sister and her husband barged in, clueless about the whole thing, and dropped a bombshell. All of Dad's stocks and the $5 million inheritance will go to my wife, the oldest daughter, so hands off, my brother-in-law declared. Mom and I were speechless at their audacity. "We did it, Kelly. Now we're set for life," cheered my brother-in-law, fist-pumping with joy. The lawyer, clearly surprised, spoke up. "Hold on a minute." As my sister glared, the lawyer gave them a stern look and said, "Kelly, you're not entitled to any inheritance." My sister and her husband were stunned, protesting. "That can't be right. Kelly's the oldest daughter. She should get everything." It was clear my brother-in-law had been banking on that inheritance, assuming my sister would get it all. Their expressions shifted as the lawyer spoke softly. "Did you not know Kelly is not Mr. Watson's biological child?" Suddenly, my sister's face paled, her eyes darting to our mother. "Mom!" Our mother wore a complex expression. While I had always known my sister was a half-sibling, it seemed she had been kept in the dark. She began shaking our mother, almost frantic. "Mom, what does this mean?" "Kelly, you're from my previous marriage," our mother muttered, shaken by my sister's grip. My sister, who had often teased me about being the favorite child, now wore a stunned expression. But as she was legally adopted, she should still have inheritance rights. My brother-in-law interjected, his voice rising. "Isn't that so, Kelly?" "Yes, that's what I thought," my sister replied. But our mother shook her head. There had been no legal adoption. Both my sister and brother-in-law seemed incredulous. "That can't be. I'm the oldest daughter. Even Dad said so." My sister's anger turned towards me. "I'm going to let you take everything." She snapped, to which I responded, irritated by her entitlement. "After all the support Dad gave you, you still say that? Be quiet. I'm his rightful heir." My sister and brother-in-law protested. "But what's wrong with a father supporting his daughter?" I sighed, feeling the weight of the situation. While it's normal for parents to support their children, my sister had been using my father's money to settle debts and deal with various troubles. Mrs. Watson, John, the lawyer, who had been silent until now, suggested, Why don't we let Kelly see the will too?" "The will? I have no idea about that." My sister panicked, though it was her own fault for not paying attention. Dad wanted us all to discuss the will's contents when he made it, but my sister brushed it off and went out to play instead. When I pointed this out, my brother-in-law gave her a fierce glare. "What were you thinking?" This was important. Faced with the question of what to do next, they agreed to hear it. The lawyer then revealed Dad's will, stating clearly that the inheritance was for me and my mother. It also explained why Dad didn't adopt my sister. Initially, he intended to, but he grew disappointed with her behavior towards me, her half-brother, and her reckless spending as she got older. So I actually have no inheritance rights. Realizing this, my sister was stunned. Damn it, what now? Suddenly, my brother-in-law raised his voice, accusing, "You lied to me. You said you had money." His demeanor turned aggressive, leaving my mother and sister shocked, but I wasn't surprised. My brother-in-law had often shown his greed. Perhaps he even married my sister for her money. "Kelly, don't come back until you've got some money," he commanded. "Wait, Chris, what do you mean? I thought I was going to be wealthy. What a letdown." Roughly pushing past my sister, my brother-in-law stormed out of the room. Left behind, my sister glared at us, her face red with anger, and cried out to our flustered mother, "Mom, why didn't you have me adopted? It's not fair that only you get the inheritance. I should have gotten something too, but you didn't handle it right. This is awful, Mom," she sobbed, making a scene. I was taken aback by her outburst, but the lawyer seemed unfazed, perhaps accustomed to such drama. "Why does he get everything?" she demanded. "Because I'm Dad's son," I responded. My sister's eyes filled with anger as she longed at me, shouting, "You! It would have been better if you were never born." I thought to myself that even if I hadn't existed, Dad would likely have made the same decision given my sister's character. Before I could say anything, the lawyer calmly intervened. "Kelly, if you continue like this, it will involve the police." My sister flinched, possibly recalling her past shoplifting incidents. "Kelly," our mother called out, tears in her eyes. 6 months passed, and the inheritance proceedings went smoothly without any hiccups. Though my sister and brother-in-law grumbled for a bit, the lawyer's efficient management left them with no room to meddle. My mother gave my sister some money, but I refrained from commenting on it. What bothered me most was their sudden disappearance with the funds, displaying their blatant gold-digging behavior, which left a sour taste in the mouths of our relatives who were aware of the situation. One day I took my mother, wife, and daughter out for a meal. Thanks to my wife's suggestion, my mother, who had been somewhat withdrawn since Dad's passing, seemed more cheerful in the company of her adorable granddaughter. "Hey, Mom, why don't you come live with us?" I proposed. "But you know Kelly might drop by sometimes. She only shows up when she needs money, right? Don't be too accommodating with her." My mother hesitated. Her reluctance was understandable, given that my sister is her biological daughter. Plus, if our family moved into the family home, my sister might stir up trouble again. Respecting her concerns, I simply asked her to think it over as I drove towards the family home to drop her off. As we pulled up, we noticed lights on in the supposedly empty house. It wasn't the time for the helper to be there, so maybe my sister had returned. With that in mind, I parked the car in the garage. "Let's pop in for a quick coffee," I suggested as we stepped out of the car and headed towards the entrance. Suddenly, a car swerved toward us, narrowly missing us. Reacting to my daughter's cry, I instinctively shielded my wife. Ouch! The car grazed me, but I was thrown into a nearby flower bed, taking a hard knock. The car came to a halt after crashing into the garage entrance. "Are you all right, honey?" My wife and daughter rushed over to help me up while my mother stood trembling at the entrance, understandably shaken. Panic ensued, and I was rushed to the hospital by ambulance, where I had to stay overnight. Later, I learned that the driver was Chris Adams, my brother-in-law. He claimed to the police that he mistook the accelerator for the brake, but I doubted his explanation. When my mother and sister visited me in the hospital, my sister looked at me coldly and remarked, "You're surprisingly resilient, aren't you?" I couldn't help but think that if I had been seriously injured, my mother would have inherited everything. "Too bad for you," I said with a smirk. My sister visibly tensed. "You were counting on it, weren't you?" I noticed her discomfort as she looked away. "Well, Mom told me she plans to waive her inheritance in my favor, so causing such an accident was pointless." My sister seemed taken aback by this revelation. It appeared incomprehensible to her that someone would refuse what they could inherit. "I have a wife and kids, so Mom asked me to pass it on to them. That's what parents do." But my sister stuttered. "I even made a will early on, following Dad's example," I continued, leaving my sister speechless. "So unfortunately, my share won't be going to Mom anymore." My sister trembled and shook as she stared at me. "Can't you at least give me some? There's $5 million, right?" When I firmly refused, my sister's face contorted into a furious expression as she grabbed my collar. "Give me half. I'm your sister." I regarded her with pity as she continued to scream in an unsettling tone, perhaps driven to madness by the prospect of the inheritance. "Don't you realize that your greed would disappoint Dad?" My sister's face flushed with anger as she reached for my throat. "Kelly, what are you doing?" My mother interjected, her voice raised as nurses arrived to escort my sister out. Although my mother seemed inclined to defend her, it was clear that my sister had directed insults towards her too. Where did I go wrong in raising her? It was heartbreaking to hear my mother say this with sadness in her voice. Shortly after, my mother fell ill. As her condition worsened, my wife and I stepped in to assist with transportation and household tasks at the family home. This seemed to upset my sister, likely because she had encountered my wife during her visits to ask for money or had heard about our help from our mother. One day, my sister called me abruptly. "From now on, we'll take care of Mom. You two don't need to come," she declared. "What's this all about?" I tried to reason with her, but my sister didn't listen and hung up, claiming it was already decided. I confirmed with my wife, who had received the same message and been dismissed. Concerned about my sister's lack of experience in caregiving or household duties, I quickly reached out to my mother. Surprisingly, my brother-in-law had some caregiving experience, which provided some comfort. At that point, my mother was still quite independent, so it seemed manageable for the time being. I felt a bit relieved. However, within a month, my mother was rushed to the hospital by ambulance due to a medication dosage error. She appeared alarmingly frail when we arrived. The doctor was puzzled. My mother had never made such a mistake before. While my wife stayed with her, I went back to the family home, only to find it in disarray. The fridge was empty despite my mother's love for cooking, and it seemed the hired help had been canceled without any discussion. I felt ashamed for even considering trusting my sister and was furious. A significant amount of money had been withdrawn from my mother's bank account, even though her bank card and PIN were secured in the safe. Thankfully, the account containing the inheritance was untouched in a safe deposit box, but most of the funds allocated for living expenses were gone. I gathered essential items for my mother's hospital stay, along with her bank card, and returned to explain the situation to her. "Did Kelly?" my mother asked, seemingly unaware of the bank card situation. However, when I inquired about the medication error, she looked somber and confessed that it was prepared by my brother-in-law. "Mom, perhaps it's best not to allow my sister into the house anymore," I suggested. "I promised to take care of you, but the house is in such disarray, and you've lost so much weight. Have you been eating properly?" My mother's words weighed heavily on me. "Mom, you should come live with us. I'll build a home where we can all be together," I proposed, causing my mother to break down in tears. However, her health continued to deteriorate despite the doctor's efforts. Perhaps the incident with my sister had weakened her heart. She never recovered and eventually passed away, almost as if following my father. Upon returning to the family home to make funeral arrangements, I discovered that all the valuables had vanished. It appeared my sister and brother-in-law had taken them in their desperate pursuit of money. Standing amidst the empty rooms, I was first shocked and then consumed by a fierce anger. I vowed to hold them accountable for their actions. The day after my mother's funeral, my sister and I were scheduled to meet with the lawyer, presumably to discuss the inheritance. Too bad Mom's inheritance rightfully belongs to me, her daughter, my sister boldly declared. I couldn't help but chuckle at her statement, as it seemed she was gravely mistaken. "Let's see what the will says," I suggested as the lawyer unveiled the document. My sister's face drained of color. "No, this can't be. Kelly is not entitled to inherit anything. That's Dad's final wish." My brother-in-law exploded in anger. However, the lawyer calmly reiterated the same statement. "This is absurd. Kelly is that old woman's biological child," my brother-in-law shouted, sweeping items off the table in a fit of rage. "You can't deceive us. Give us the inheritance now." "Chris, did you try to harm my mom?" I confronted him. He shot me an irritated glare. "What? I never did such a thing," he retorted. "Then why was there a mistake with her medication?" I pressed further. My brother-in-law scowled in annoyance. "Who cares about that, John? It's outrageous that we're not getting any inheritance." My sister interjected, seemingly losing her composure. "What have you done?" I asked her, stunned. It seemed she hadn't rushed over after hearing about our mother's passing, but had been banking on the inheritance to cover her expenses. "Tell me this isn't true. I'm getting nothing," my sister demanded of the lawyer. The lawyer began carefully explaining the legal distribution of the inheritance. However, after deducting the amount my sister had withdrawn and the items she had sold, there was almost nothing left. She scratched her head in frustration. This outcome had been reached after consulting with the lawyer in advance. "That can't be. It can't be this little," my sister muttered to herself, clearly dissatisfied. Having relied on our parents without ever experiencing the hardships of work, she seemed out of touch with reality. I couldn't contain my contempt. "Mom thought you'd take care of her, but you just took her money and abandoned her. You ungrateful person." I couldn't hold back my anger. "Taking care of someone costs money, you know." "What are you talking about?" my sister shot back. "Then show me the detailed expenses you used for Mom's living costs. I'll cover the necessary expenses." I extended my hand, challenging her. My sister's face paled, and her lips trembled. I don't have that." "Without receipts, it won't be recognized," the lawyer emphasized, leaving my sister speechless. Facing her, my brother-in-law attempted to sway me with a pleading tone. "John, your sister really needs help. Can't you lend her a hand, even just a little?" I declined firmly, feeling my frustration growing. It seemed my brother-in-law was reaching his limit, too. If everything had gone as planned, Kelly would have had the entire inheritance by now, he muttered. "What do you mean by that?" I questioned, but before I could delve deeper, my brother-in-law let slip a revealing comment. "Because of this guy, nothing ever goes smoothly. I was supposed to get a new car, but all I got was barely enough for repairs." My sister desperately tried to interject, but it was too late. "That's a serious accusation. It sounds like fraud," the lawyer remarked, holding her quarter and smiling at the couple. "What? That's illegal." My brother-in-law, realizing his mistake, turned pale. "I clearly stated at the outset that this meeting would be recorded, and you both agreed to it," the lawyer said. Turning to him, I declared, "Chris, I'll be pressing charges for that accident." "Don't be absurd. There's no evidence," he retorted. "You've just provided the evidence yourself," I said. My sister burst into tears and shook my brother-in-law in frustration. "You fool, it's all your fault. What are we going to do now?" Eventually, my brother-in-law faced criminal charges. His previous offenses also came to light, leading to his detention by the police. My sister, implicated as an accomplice, received a lesser sentence. However, unable to afford her rent, she sought help from relatives, but was rejected by everyone. As for me, I continued to work diligently without relying on any inheritance, finding solace in the dividends from stock